Today I am discussing about the topic major steps in scientific methods. Scientific method is a systematic procedure and a technique used in scientific inquiries and investigation for explaining natural observations. It is technically called empiricism. It holds that reasoning alone is not sufficient in shifting truth, and also that idea must always be tested through observations and experimentations. In brief, a scientific method involves the collection of data through observations and experimentations and the formulation of testing of hypotheses. This in turn is completed in repeatable steps in order to predict further results. The major steps of a scientific method are following. Careful observation of natural phenomena. The second one is defining or identifying a problem by posing questions about the observations. Collection of additional information to know more about the observed phenomena. Search for answers to the questions by analyzing the problem. Verification of the correctness of the answer through tested and further observations. Population of hypotheses on the basis of the finding of the search. Testing of the acceptability or validity of the hypothesis through experiment. Generalization of the experimentally proved facts and formulation of theories. Then we can discuss the first point, observation. The observation is a scientific study, begins with the observation of natural phenomena, which arouses the curiosity of a observer. The observation should be correct and repeatable. A scientific observation becomes acceptable only when it is repeated by number of persons. Observation can be direct using our sense organs or indirect with the help of instruments. The second point was defining the problem. The second step is to define the problem. This involves asking questions about the observations. The whats, whys, and hows of the observation have to be subjected to scientific analysis. Therefore, the problem should be defined in such a way that the different aspects of the observed phenomena are amenable into investigations. Then we can consider and we observe some species of birds visiting a particular area every year in the same season. After a short period of the stay, then disappear to appear again in the same season next year. This observation prompts us to ask the questions to ourselves: where do the birds come from? What brings them over here? What purpose does the visit serve? What is the secret behind the regularity of the annual visit, and so on. Then the next one is collection of informations. Before beginning a scientific investigation, the investigator has to collect and make use of all the available informations and data about the problem. This helps to know more about the problem and also to avoid the repetition of a work done earlier by somebody else. And the next one is framing of hypothesis. Hypothesis is the supposition, assumption, or provisional explanation which has to be provided or disproved in the light of acceptable facts. It provides a logical answers to a questions and also helps to predict new facts. Prediction made on the basis of hypotheses have to be further tested by controlled experiments. Let us examine the procedure of making a hypothesis with the reference to an example. Think that we have to find out the reason for poor agriculture yield in a particular field. We suspect all possible reasons such as lack of water supply, insufficient availability of light, deficiency of nitrogen in the soil, etc. On close observation, it was found that there is sufficient availability of water and light. So, we assume that deficiency of soil nitrogen might be the cause of poor yield. Now, we generalize this assumption and hold that soil nitrogen is essential for rich crop. This is the hypothesis. Then acceptability of the hypothesis has to be verified and established through scientific testing. The next one is testing or experimenting. Testing or experimenting is the correctness, validity, or acceptability of a hypothesis has to be tested with the help of controlled experiment. Control is an essential part of an ideal experiment. It helps to compare experimental results with non-experimental natural results. This in turn confirms experimental result has and establishes the validity of hypothesis. Quite a number of experimental studies cannot have control. This means that some hypotheses are based only on accurate and repeated observations and they do not require testing or verifications. Let us, let us visualize a controlled experiment to establish the hypothesis that the time period of a pendulum depends on its length and independence on the mass suspended. For the experiment, we select a pendulum whose length and the suspended mass can be changed. Find the period of the pendulum for a given length and mass. Repeat the experiment by changing the mass and keeping the length unchanged. We can observe that the time period obtained will be the same. Now, change the length of pendulum for different masses and the same length. Find out the time period which would be a constant. From the observation, it can be inferred that for a given length the time period is constant, and also that by changing the length the time period also can be changed. For this we can conclude that the time period of a pendulum is depend on its length and independent of the mass suspended. The last point is theorizing. Theory is a sufficiently acceptable general principle which seeks to explain phenomena. It is formulated on the basis of experimental evidences or on the basis of the analysis of interrelated facts. This does not mean that all experiments contribute to theorization. A hypothesis becomes a theory when it is supported by a large body of observations and experimental evidences. A theory becomes a scientific principle or law when it is universally accepted and also when it becomes capable of making true predictions. And this is the diagrammatic representation of the scientific method. Okay, thank you.